cousin marriage, UK?
Let's talk about a few. We like to go through a few kind of medical stories, health stories, for the first 10 minutes or so. So, what should we do first? Well, I'll tell you what. Let me get your quick take, because I've just talked to Chloe Dobbs about this. I've done this story 2 days in a row because I find it slightly breathtaking, actually. That Richard Holden, the MP for Tory MP for Billericay, feels that it's necessary now for us to bring in a bill, an act, if you like, to ban first cousin marriages. These have been legal since Henry VIII's time, because he wanted to marry his first cousin. And the reason we've never done anything about the lack of a ban, the lack of laws around this, is that, relatively speaking, such unions, such marriages, weddings between first cousins, were sort of vanishingly rare, so it wasn't really worth it. Now, though, as Mr. Holden diplomatically puts it, among some communities, it's becoming alarmingly common. In fact, what we're talking about basically is Muslim communities, but Sub-Saharan culture, South Asian culture, Middle Eastern culture, first cousin marriages are very popular, very common. Now, because we now have those communities, growing communities in our country, they're becoming, as I said just now, alarmingly common here. And, these marriages, they don't always cause defects, but they are responsible for some serious birth defects. Kids born of these kind of unions can have cleft palates, cleft lips, blindness, hearing loss, child diabetes, limb malformations, heart defects, schizophrenia, and so much more. It's serious. In Bradford, when they did a study a couple of years ago, I think they found that 34% of that city's birth defects were from first cousin marriages. So it seems to me, Renee, you're a doctor. You better be anyway. I think you are. That it's a no-brainer. We've got to stop this.
Right, it's a no-brainer. This first came to my attention about 12 years ago, Kevin, where I was approached by an MP friend to do some work on it because I was working in Newham Hospital. And
in East London,
yeah. And let me tell you, on the ward in Newham Hospital, it was full of children with mental or physical disorders from first cousin marriages, many of whom were 2 years old and had never been home. They were on an NHS ward being cared for by NHS doctors and nurses. The family would come to visit and go home and make more children with more disabilities because they won't accept that it's because they've married a first cousin. They say it's God's will. And we looked at this, a group of us with some MPs, and it was decided way back then that it was too politically sensitive to take forward. Now, these children are being condemned to a life of misery. That's the first and most important point. We're bringing children into the world with disability that we don't need to. That's number one. Number two, to say that you can't legislate against it, we already legislate against this because you're not allowed to marry your father or your mother or your sister. So it doesn't take much more to just add to that list or your first cousin.
For the same reasons that those kind of marriages are likely to cause childbirth defects.
Yes, because you're bringing together genes that should meet somebody else's gene that's okay. But when you keep it in the family, it's more likely to meet the same gene that's defective. Yeah. And we...
I go downstairs, maybe the restaurant is open.
We have to be able to throw sunlight on this and say, look, I'm sorry, guys, this may have been okay centuries ago. It may have been okay before we had the information. It may be okay back home where your culture accepts it. It's not okay in British culture. We don't want to bring disabled children into the world. We want to protect you and your future children.
And a study 2 years ago by the Bradford NHS Trust culturally conveniently decided or concluded that first cousin marriages were and I quote, cultural practice, and in terms of birth defects weren't much worse than the equivalent of white women having children over the age of 34.
What a load of
That's
nonsense.
claptrap, isn't it?
What a load of nonsense. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
Absolute nonsense. When you have a baby later, your risk isn't so much of a deformed child, what your
risk
risk
is to the
is
woman.
of having preeclampsia, small birth weight,
Okay.
early pregnancy, early delivery, stillbirth. It's nonsense, and it's trying again to normalise something because we don't want to upset one particular community.
Yeah, indeed. And in Parliament, we've got these MPs, for Gaza, and we've got this now set of MPs in Parliament who are basically MPs for the Middle Ages. So last week we had that MP standing up and saying, can we bring back blasphemy laws and stop desecration of the scriptures? What do you think it is? It's 2024, mate, not 1324. No, we can't have blasphemy laws. They're ridiculous. They're medieval. They're outmoded. If I want to set fire to the Quran or the Bible, I should be able to do so. End of.
Yes, but you can't, can you?
I can.
You can't.
I can.
Because you would be hunted out of existence.
Well,
Well-
yes, but I can, actually, legally, and that's right. Now, this week, I'm not going to do that, by the way.
Exactly.
I think
I've
that's a
got
good
better
idea.
things to do.
Yeah.
But you
Me
should
too.
be able to in a free country.
course you should.
really should. But now we